This is the last part of Federalist 56, the last long paragraph. As you can see, I'm reminding you again of all the resources that are available to you on C-SPAN. Go to C-SPAN's website and you'll see multiple categories of videos that you can learn from. One of them under the C-SPAN series. You can learn about the presidents, the American writers, all sorts of stuff. And then the Federalist Papers and America as a civilization definitely makes more sense to you. You see how the laws have changed, how people have changed as people went westward, how things changed. I'm just trying to remind you again of C-SPAN being there. And I've also already told you about other resources that are available to you. Trying to see if I've got something to show you here. I guess we'll just, one of them is the American Writers series. See, American Writers. Make sure you look at those. Anyways, I'll start reading the last paragraph. It's a long paragraph. The experience of Great Britain, which presents to mankind so many political lessons, both of the monetary and exemplary kind, and which has been frequently consulted in the course of these inquiries, corroborates the result of the reflections which we have just made. Even though America had a revolution, they went to war with Britain, but they admired the British system still because they realized it had so many good things, and for the longest time they considered themselves to be British subjects, except living in America, till the British king and parliament said, no, we won't let you have representatives here, and then the revolution happened. So there's lots of things that they admired about what they used to call the mother country. So Madison's saying, let's look at the British system that we are very familiar with and we have mentioned quite a bit in these Federalist Papers. Okay? And he says, it has both of the monetary and exemplary kind. Exemplary is when something is exemplary and you look up to it. It's a good example. Monetary here mostly refers to something that admonishes you, something that tells you of a bad experience, bad things that's happened, and you learn from a bad thing. So he says we're going to have to look at both good lessons we can learn from the British and the bad lessons that we need to learn to avoid. The number of inhabitants of the two kingdoms of England and Scotland cannot be stated at less than 8 million. The representatives of these 8 million in the House of Commons amount to 558. Of this number, 1/9 are elected by 364 persons, and 1/2 by 5,723 persons. And Madison himself refers to a book by James Burgh, B-U-R-G-H, called Political Disquisitions, which according to historian J.R. Pohl was published in 1774, and most of the people like Hamilton, Madison, and them were familiar. It gave a lot of raw data about what was happening in England, about who is who in the government, and a lot of political opposition, a lot of the group that were called Whigs, W-H-I-G, not wig like the one you wear. It's spelled the same way, but It's short for Whigamore. They use that label. It's like we are country. We don't belong to the royal court, but we are the opposition. We belong to the rest of the country. So these political thinkers, the Whigs that had real influence, a lot of influence on American founders, they were using James Berg's book, Book of Facts and Who is Who. And Madison is saying, look, there's 558 members in the House of Commons, and half of them are elected by almost 5,000 people. And again, according to this historian J.R. Paul, if you remember at that time, Britain was gradually, slowly but surely taking over India, colonizing India, and at least running the government at the time. It wasn't totally in control of India. And all these British people that went there and made a lot of money and came back to England, at least to put their money to use and buy influence, they were called nabobs. All these people came back and were able to take advantage of what was in England called rotten boroughs. Rotten boroughs. These are areas that had representation in Parliament, but people had already left that area. It had depopulated. Yet they still had representatives in the Parliament as if people lived there. So whoever who was the owner of that land could actually have a lot of influence and maybe do dealings with these nabobs that were coming back from England, from India with a lot of money. So there was a lot of influence peddling by money and stuff. So Madison doesn't say it here, but this is exactly what he means. He says, half of the votes, half of the people that sit in the House of Commons are already bought for. They're people that don't represent anybody, just their own interest, and they are there because they have money. And let me see. Okay. It cannot be supposed that the half thus elected, and who do not even reside among the people at large, can add anything either to the security of the people against the government or to the knowledge of their circumstances and interests in the legislative councils. On the contrary, it is notorious that they are more frequently the representatives and instruments of the executive magistrate than the guardians and advocates of the popular rights. In other words, these wealthy people eventually become actually tools of the crown and the court. They are not there to represent the people. They might therefore, with great propriety, be considered as something more than a mere deduction from the real representatives of the nation. We will, however, consider them in this light alone, and will not extend the deduction to a considerable number of others who do not reside among their constituents, are very faintly connected with them, and have very little particular knowledge of their affairs. With all these concessions, 279 persons only will be the depository of the safety, interest, and happiness of 8 millions. So when you do the math, only 279 people are there to represent 8 million people. That is to say, there will be one representative only to maintain the rights and explain the situation of 28,670 constituents in an assembly exposed to the whole force of executive influence and extending its authority to every object of legislation within a nation whose affairs are in the highest degree diversified and complicated. Yet it is very certain not only that a vulnerable portion of the freedom has been preserved under all these circumstances, but that the defects in the British Code are chargeable in a very small proportion on the ignorance of the legislature concerning the circumstances of the people. allowing to this case the weight which is due to it and comparing it with that of the House of Representatives as above explained, it seems to give the fullest assurance that a representative for every 30,000 inhabitants will render the latter both a safe and competent guardian of the interests which will be confided to it. So he brings up this British example. He says, when you look at it, do the math, for every 28,000 plus people, they have one representative. And that's what we have done in this Constitution. We have said that for every 30,000 people back then, not now, minimum of 30,000, you can have one representative. So he says, with all the bad things that have happened in Britain, when you look at it, they're still one of the freest countries in the world. And 30,000 people, or less than 30,000 people represent, one member of House of Commons represents almost 30,000 people. So when you look at our system, the parallel is there, except our representatives will really, really represent people because you're the fountain of power. This is going to be a republic. They'll come back to you every 2 years. If you're not happy with them, you can kick them out and elect new members. It's not like the British system where money is very important. So we will stop here and we'll continue in the next video with Federalist 57.